Chapter 44. The spiritual aspect of the Saturnian religion. Spiritual rebirth through teachings and practice. Since we have learned about the ceremonial part of the religion of the Saturnites, we shall now turn, as aforementioned, to its spiritual part. Since we have sufficiently observed the ceremonial part, by now it must have crossed your mind that the ceremony where the angel spirits of the heavens, and quite often God himself, visibly appear and have discussions with the Saturnites, is, anyhow, as spiritual as it can possibly be. Where could there possibly be something more spiritual? I say, let it be. The following will teach you how, in something spiritual, there is even more spiritually contained. So that you understand this to some degree, I will show you an example of how this is possible in accordance with nature. For example, take a pitcher of very good wine. Who of you will not understand soon, and also feel from the effects, that this wine contains something which is even more of a primary spiritual substance than the wine itself? However, just ask the next best pharmacist, and he will tell you that from this wine you can distill the finest spirit, ether, of wine. And this spirit can be rectified several times, so that the spirit becomes so volatile that, if one drop is poured from its receptacle, it will completely evaporate after it has fallen no more than 3 feet before it reaches the ground. Do you now realize how much more spirituality is contained in the wine, which is already exceedingly spiritual? If this makes itself known in visible nature, by how much more will it reveal itself in all that, when it is completely characteristic of the spirit itself? For example, this applies also to light. As you know, the earth is illuminated from the rays of the sun. Do you see in these rays the enlivening energy and the countless forms? No, you do not. You do not even sense the simple effective energy or power of the ray. And many people do not know any differently as they experience it every day. Namely, that this ray is not capable of any greater heat effect than the one it expresses daily. But what would the observer say if these rays were concentrated or condensed into one focal point by a large magnifying glass, and then expressed such energy that it could suddenly dissolve even the hardest diamond? A layman would be surprised to witness the higher effects of these light rays, and he would probably say, who would have believed that in those gentle sun rays that warm us every day lies hidden such an incomprehensibly fierce power? This applies as well to the ceremonial religious worship of the Saturnites. Even though the religious part appears to be completely spiritual, there is still in the religion of the Saturnites an extraordinarily strong ether, which has, in the unification of its delightful light rays, a strong inner effect which is very difficult to understand for you people on earth. Therefore, we can pose the question and say, of what does this actual spiritual contained within the spiritual consist? The actual spiritual contained within the spiritual, which is already known to you, lies within the living inner cognizance of the Great Spirit, as well as all the levels and orderly relations and conditions which closely and affectionately connect the free human being with the heavens and the Great Spirit himself, and vice versa. How do these human beings recognize the Great Spirit? First, they are given external instructions through words of the teacher about the nature of God. Then they are guided to the cognizance of the will of the Great Spirit, and then to the practice of the recognized will. These instructions are still the external religious worship, which is the path to the inner spiritual true life. It is actually already spiritual wine and the non-concentrated light of the sun. The active practice of the recognized will of the Great Spirit therefore resembles the distillation and rectification of a pharmacist, and furthermore resembles the concentration of the sun rays by means of a large magnifying glass. Or in other words, it is the actual independent active liberation of the actual prime spiritual being from its surrounding matter. Are you now beginning to comprehend what the actual spiritual religious worship of the Saturnites consists of? I will give you an answer in a few words, which will immediately open the door to the light. And these few words are: the rebirth of the Spirit. This rebirth must occur in the Saturnites, as well as it must in you. Without it, an inhabitant of Saturn will understand as little of the Spirit and all the conditions and relations between him, the heavens, and the Great Spirit, as you do on earth. It is absolutely unsatisfactory for the rebirth of the Spirit that someone merely has the ability to see spirits, as is quite often the case on earth, where many such people see these frightening and horrible apparitions, of which they neither know nor comprehend any more than a blind person knows the colours of the rainbow. Clairvoyance is not as much a part of a complete or true rebirth as the determination of every action. That means that it is structured in such a way as it was established from the very beginning or prime origin, in all its divine order and wisdom. How and when will this take place? This can only take place when the Spirit, through the strictest compliance of the prescribed path of God, rectifies himself from matter and finds himself again in a focal point, and finally as a complete whole existing being within himself. having stepped out of all sensuousness of matter, as a complete unity, in order to open up the new spiritual senses determinately and completely to the impressions and conditions of that world of which he himself is the actual, original inhabitant. Once a human being has attained this level, another activity begins to become effective in his whole being. Everything will begin to change: his sight, his hearing, his feeling, his sentience. All his thoughts turn into forms which he will see. His will becomes an accomplished deed. His words become definite and unite with the thought and the will. Space is no longer a factor, and time has shown him the last minute, because in a free spiritual existence you hear, see, feel, perceive, think, will, act, and speak beyond time and space. That means, for such a person, only one present exists, in which an eternal past and an eternal future greet each other in a friendly manner, and something which is infinitely far away is no farther from his eyes than his own thoughts. Every person on Saturn strives with all his might for this spiritual state of development. But he will not attain this state until he has completely fulfilled within himself all the conditions of life. The control of one's own nature is not sufficient for complete fulfillment, but all the conditions of life that are known to him must become completely part of his personal proficiency. When he has become a perfect master in all these conditions, he becomes free within himself, and all his vital energy is born united out of all his sensual nature. When such a birth has taken place, then you already know what has happened to such a person. It is known as the rebirth of the spirit. Therefore, the faithfully continued practice of all conditions of life is what concerns the spiritual part of the religion of the Saturnites.